Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mercurial Gems. I'm Jen,
And I'm V.
and today we are going to discuss going no contact with family and also a little dive on boundaries in general as two individuals that have deeply had to do this work and have gone in and out of no contact with different family members and have really done the therapy work to figure and navigate a lot of this out.
I feel like in this day and age, there's a lot of different reasons people could go no contact with family member. For me, it was because of like a lot of just deep-seated abuse that like will not be held accountable for, and I deserve accountability in the spaces that I'm going to take up space in. Jen.
Yeah, so I think for me, there has just been periods of time where my nervous system actually needed space to take it back even a little further beyond even our personal stories, just to go over some like foundational stuff. Is going no contact is just essentially just telling a person in your life that you no longer want to be hearing from them, you're blocking them out, and essentially just blocking off contact. But this doesn't have to be something that is forever permanent. This can be periods of time in life where you just know you need the pause button. And for me, that pause button has been very important multiple times. But there is another layer too that I think there is so many people within our age range that are going no contact a lot more with family. And I know from being in the evangelical church world that this is like a hot topic that is being kind of rewritten as the new like evil lure of the world to cut off your family, and it's getting like very tied in with what would be like essentially like a cult culture where they actually do have you cut off all of your family, usually to isolate you. It's all kind of being lumped in as just this really evil thing when there is a huge wisdom and maturity behind the decision sometimes to just pause on contact with somebody. I will give like a little rabbit hole from my religion trauma, just side sector, because my family has always supported Focus on the Family, which is a big Christian organization behind a lot of the disgusting legislation we see really push forward. They have a lot of funding to be able to weave in and out of the government. And I know probably 3 or so years back, they put out a big newsletter to anybody who has probably parents that support Focus on the Family in any way, that all these people are being lured in to go no contact with family, that you should really push past that, don't let evil win. It was just this big movement. And around that same time, I started seeing my parents reference this sort of rhetoric a lot more often when I had already taken a few years where I wasn't talking to them at all, where I needed that pause for myself. And it was just seen in such a disrespectful way that it was something that was so fun for us to put into place. Like, yeah. I'm going no contact, like, haha, like when it's actually devastating to have to cut off people in your life. Connection is so important. I think so many of us had fought to have ourselves be able to stay in connection and contact with people, but there gets to be a point where your boundaries are being so stomped on that there's really only one answer for healing for yourself without getting so triggered so often that it's making you physically sick, and that is taking pauses.
Yeah, and I just want to hold space because religious trauma, I think, is a big chunk of the community, but it can also, like, my family had nothing to do with religion, but at the same time, like, they also are having that same rhetoric pushed on them through, like, Fox News and stuff. And so, like, just holding space that, like, if you're someone who's had to go no contact with a parent, or maybe you're in a moment now where you are considering going no contact, but it feels really fucking bad, like, that's very valid and way more the reality of getting to the point of having to go no contact than being like, I'm just, like, over it. I'm just gonna live my best life and be my best self. Like, sure, you have to lean into the positivity of it, but, like, not to the point of, like, not holding space for, like, no one wants to not have a relationship with family members, may that be your parents or grandparents. For me, I think going no contact got sped up and a little bit expanded when I came out. Not all of my family wants to hold space for the uniqueness of me. I can show up if I want to be my 16-year-old self. Otherwise, they're not really interested. And at that point, I'm not really interested either. And so I just, yeah, it can be a lot more emotional, I think, than people realize on the end of someone who's chosen to go no contact. I feel like holidays get harder. Anytime everyone has, like, something that typically you'd gather with your family, like, all of that really does have to have its own space held for it, and you just have to navigate way differently. But that's where, and we've talked about this before, your found family comes in, and having people surrounding you who actually understand you at your core, at all of your complexities, at all of your uniqueness, because you deserve to be celebrated in the spaces you take up. And I'm really sorry to anyone who's listening who's had to go through this in life.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to get loud in your truth. So whether that was like a coming out process, whether that was like getting diagnosed and figuring out like some of the struggles you've had like your whole life, or even just bringing what has and was like physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse, like these are usually the big themes that when you take something that should be secret that has a little bit, not even a little bit, like a lot of emotional charge behind it, there are just people that, because they can't face one emotion in themselves, when you are being loud about an emotional truth for yourself, they can't hold space for it. And to the line of thought, like, I know what a lot of people will throw at you when you attempt to break off connection and contact. They'll say, like, family is family, or like,
blood is thicker than water.
Let's not, like, we don't have to make it political. And that can be a boundary where you just keep certain subjects off of the table. But I also think that it is those very like polarizing topics where it can just feel very inauthentic to not be able to speak about so many things that are a part of your day-to-day life, that when you go to share what you actually are and your just day-to-days of reality, there is just like a blank stare. You're not actually being able to have like a full conversation about what your life actually entails. And like you said, it's people wanting to see you at one certain version of yourself that was more digestible or worked for them, not the expansive version that maybe you landed in later in your adult years that really took a lot of work to get to. And I think that's the other thing is I can see, especially Trump has been the most polarizing thing, I think, for a lot of our like
across the board.
Yeah, and I think it's very hard to like commingle in both worlds when one side is seeing it as, you know, one thing and one side is seeing it as the other, and it just seems like everyone should be able to have their opinion, but there are so many conversations and truths that exist within the blend of all of that that need to like really be had, and there's just some people that are just not capable of having conversations like that.
Well, and there's a huge difference too of difference of opinion and dehumanizing beliefs. Like, I think that is also where, again, across the board, I think a lot of people who have had to go no contact or right land in that category, because no matter what sector of the world of, you know, uniqueness you come from, that already had some tension points within, you know, your relationship with your family, I think the world as it is today has really made it like an us or them thing, which is heartbreaking and really shouldn't be as it is. But nonetheless, we are here.
Yeah. And so I think like the other important route to think of this through is just of in terms of your nervous system. We bring it back to the nervous system all of the time, but there are there is a lot of benefit between working through different trauma responses, but in order to feel safe in your body, you need to actually feel safe and heard to even start to do the work on looking at your trauma responses, looking at what could be disconnection in your body, not being able to even know what your needs are. You will never start to unpack that when you are in a traumatized state all the time.
Yeah.
This is where bonus credit to anyone that has stayed in their hometown and in environments that are always reminding them of something else and still growing in those environments. That is a very, very hard task. I think for a lot of us, we had to kind of move and shift out of the world to be able to calm down enough to start a fresh start to kind of piece some of this stuff together. Yeah, so I think a lot of us had to kind of move out and reset just to even start to discover who we were outside of just conditioned responses of our environment. Like, it's very easy to go through the motions when all of your family, your community, your surroundings are kind of regurgitating the same stuff. Mm-hmm. I knew in my hometown I didn't feel good at all. Like, I felt very isolated, like, internally. I didn't feel like there was a lot of space to be me. I grew up in Florida, and so did V, and like there was just a lot of bullying culture around, especially for and towards people that were queer or were just more eccentric or
different.
More. Yeah, it's just the classic proud boy of like, don't be too emotional, women are crazy. Like, there were so many undertones to the environment, also so fat phobic, like with the beach culture. Diet culture is really, really elevated in that space. And
if you like education, you're 9 times out of 10 like
trying to be a know-it-all.
Yeah, you're a fucking nerd. Like, what do you know? You don't know anything, but like actually I do.
Yeah, so lots of hazing and bullying, and I think for me, I needed to get away and just let myself crash. It took like a year of like crying every single day. Tons of therapy work, tons of yoga to even start to have like a baseline nervous system again that I could start to integrate in more like living and not like I had to get a lot of trauma responses and emotional repression actually released because I really wasn't safe to feel all of my feelings. I even discounted my own feelings, like, and there does come a point where I had to be responsible for the fact that I had a part in not feeling my feelings, and that there were going to be consequences if I didn't learn how to actually maturely emotionally evolve. I was very stunted. I felt like I had to like go backwards in time to another age and start fresh because I just was not living in real time. It was very dissociative for me. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without putting really firm boundaries on things. So once I moved, I didn't have to face a lot of people that were making me feel guilty for changing.
Yeah.
That ended up helping me cultivate like some self-love and self-respect. And I went periods of time where actually not reaching out to my family, where I felt like I had to explain myself when I didn't even have a sense of self to explain yet. That was like very problematic for me, but taking years to actually build roots, let those roots even sprout, and then look at that little garden and think like, wow, I just made that and I'm proud of that. I needed to get to a certain level of security within myself before I could handle external chaos without backtripping back to like a very childish state of trauma responses.
Yeah, I think it's also a good segue into you do get to decide the boundaries and what level of access they have. Like, we say no contact, but no contact doesn't have to mean 100%. I personally have been no contact with my birther for going on 4 years now, but because I have a 10-year-old sibling, I can't be fully no contact because that is her parent. So, like, there are times where we do interact and we do have discussions. Obviously, I have shared siblings with her. So, like, my brother got married last year. Like, I didn't, make a big deal about the fact that we were going to be in the same space. But it has definitely come down to a couple times throughout the years where I've had to decide, am I in a space right now where I can hold space for a few hours to go be in the same room with her? Or am I just completely wiped of my threshold? Mm-hmm. And I think it's obviously going to be different for everyone. Maybe you just have hard days where you're like, no, I'm not answering the phone. For me, when I first moved out, I come from a family who was always on the phone with each other all day, every day. So when I first moved out of the state, for the first 3 months, I was on the phone every second I wasn't working or wasn't doing things I had to do that I couldn't be on the phone for. And one day I was like, I'm not getting anything else done because I'm constantly on the phone, but we're talking about nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not getting anything done. And at that point, like, my birther was very codependent on me to raise her other kids. So a lot of the time it was me telling her, like, coaching her through the next step, basically. And I was like, no, like, I'm not doing this. Like, I was 20 at the time. Like, I am allowed to have my own autonomy. And then slowly over time, I think we worked up to no contact because my parent just kept plowing through each boundary. So at some point I had to say, you have no respect for a boundary. I've asked very simple things and then slowly have, like, made them more concrete because you can't do the simple shit. So, like, until you can respect me where I'm at, like, I just don't want anything to do with it.
And I do think a lot of those, like, codependent dynamics that can exist within family is just an excuse, once again, to not look internally. So when you're craving to actually get to know yourself, separate to all of the things that you were just either born into, like, that can be very triggering because everyone else, if they don't have you to use as that escapism tool, all of a sudden are left scrambling. And I do think if you notice that every time a boundary is put in place, they explode on it, that is very important information to consider when you're deciding, like, what to do within that dynamic. Because when you don't feel like the words you say can be met with any level of respect, then it becomes very hard to respect yourself when no one around you is respecting you.
It's also really hard for your nervous system to know, like, I set this boundary in place to feel safe, but am I gonna be safe? Mm-hmm. Probably not.
And ignored boundaries are, like, so common, just the common ways we accepted raising children. Them saying, like, no to something and then you being like, you need to listen to your parent. Like, there's not a lot of respect for autonomy from a very young age. You are not that discipline cannot be implemented in some ways to, like, teach right and wrong in some aspects,
but because they are your parent is different than your safety is important to us, right. And that safety is why they're saying that. Like, those are two very different explanations.
Yes, and those things can be explained a lot deeper and often are just kind of thrown because the parent doesn't actually want to deal with the emotional undertones.
Yeah. We get it, you're tired, but that's a child.
Yeah. And so I think it's just become very normalized. The toxicity has been very woven into families. And I think the millennial generation to Gen Z is, like, kind of the first, like, standing in a lot more of their power and not just, like, drinking the Kool-Aid of what's acceptable and are, like, going, I actually demand more out of my connections and I want more out of my connections and I want them to feel reciprocal, not just so much take. And I think that is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And if we can stop seeing it as a threat, and if you are a parent, like, just knowing that your kid is also trying to grow and be a human too. We're all trying to live. I understand even the parents are trying to grow and learn as they go too. But there is...
But you have to grow. You can't just, like, keep trying to pull them back to where you are.
Yeah.
I think a lot of no contact family also doesn't know how to hold that 9 times out of 10, the person who's gone no contact exhausts you. Whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, like, their righteous independence, their uniqueness, their bravery to be different in a world that wants you to conform is exhausting to you. Because I think after my family doesn't talk to me for 6 months and then I have a hour-long phone call, they're like, oh, this is so great, like, we should talk more. And then I try to talk more and they don't actually have the space for me because I am an exhausting person to someone like that, and that's okay. Like, we can both be our own people, but, like, sometimes no contact is actually way more loving than it's even, like, being given off. And that person choosing to go no contact is choosing to give up the more linked in familial aspects so you can have it. So you can, like, for example, in my situation, when I set a no contact bound, it was really hard for my grandparents to not turn around and tell her everything, to not stress them out, so mom can still have her family. I'm the black sheep in this generation, and I don't even feel like a black sheep because I'm very loved and supported with my found family and the people who are around. But the first few years, it was really sad, and it was really isolating that the only people that reached out were my cousins and my brothers, because they understood that, like, everyone else wasn't talking to me. I know everyone's gonna have their own unique exchange with that, but, like, sometimes when someone has chosen to go no contact with you, that's actually, like, them choosing the loving choice over arguing every day.
Yeah. And I think by you saying that they can find you exhausting, it's less that is happening, but it's also because there are some of us that really value constant improvement and change, and want to be meeting the world very different and see that the system as is just doesn't work for so many, and don't want to just keep going through the motions with the system as it is. It's not, the world isn't how we want it to be. So we don't want to just blindly participate in what you find to be as normal. But because of that, I think it's pulling a lot of emotions up in them. And it's not only that, but a lot of people are very complacent and okay with not change and fight every day for it to look as similar as possible, because the more you box yourself into a familiar routine, the less emotions you're going to
have to
feel. And that's because you're repressing them and you're actually not letting yourself actually live. You are hyper controlling your environment. Kids that come into your life, or family members, or whoever you're cutting off, even if it's friendships, that are expansive as people and have chosen expansion and to not get stuck, that is going to be provoking. And I wanted to say too that it's really good to have people in your life that do trigger you in some ways. I want to be perfectly clear that relationships that add tension and some self-reflection are not always a bad thing, and that you can learn new communication patterns with people in your life that maybe you originally didn't have that. I think at the same time, there is an importance to paying attention to your nervous system, paying attention to the dynamics that are existing within your relationships, and making sure, like, it's not stunting your growth. Like,
yeah, there's a difference between, like, activation that then becomes a conversation that then turns into growth, and an activation where you are one-sidedly constantly having to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, and I think there's a very big difference for the parents that are all, all these kids are wanting to go no contact and they think it's some kind of fad. I think the rhetoric is very much centered around that. Like, they just don't want to be uncomfortable.
Because then all of them can continue not to hold themselves accountable.
Yes, and I think self-accountability and respect and the openness to adjusting communication styles should be a bare minimum for the people in your life. And then from there, you guys can decide a lot. Like, relationships are inherently always going to be triggering. There is there is no deep level of intimacy and connection that's not going to pull up internal work for you. But there is such a difference when it's being met healthy versus unhealthy. And even when that unhealthy dynamic is voiced, it is completely ignored and coming up with a solution plan or implementing a way to be met differently. And I think that's what you really have to gauge when you're determining who to keep in your inner circle and who to not.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who are on the receiving end of going no contact don't realize that if someone has made the decision to go no contact with them, there have been 1,000 baby steps leading up to this moment, because it's actually the last thing anyone wants. Like, I think anyone who's gone no contact with parents really deep down wishes that their parents could meet them and love them as they are and who they are, and not this version of them that like they've decided to keep in their head. And like, if you're not going to be that, don't come around.
Yeah. And I do think for the connections that have been cut off and that you haven't talked to in a long time, if that boundary is in place, that boundary is in place. But if you ever go to reopen a relationship, there is just a difference between being able to say, like, why would you have not talked to me? Like, why would you have, like, done that? How could you have done that to me? Versus saying, like, can you explain your perspective and what you felt and, like, what I was missing? Like, you can meet relationships so lovingly when you get curious on what the perspective is. And it doesn't matter if you feel that perspective is wrong. What matters is what the person felt and sensed. Yeah. And you're trying to hold respect for the feeling. I know I've had friendships that have been cut off for years, and then I've re-entered into the connection down the line. And I think just a lot of it is that pointing blame versus hearing and figuring out if that dynamic maybe learned from family pain can be corrected, or if that's going to be just the way it's always going to be met. And when I am met with like pointing blame without any curiosity towards why I did what I did, that's just not worth it to me, especially when I know that lovingly my intentions, and I think of this often, my intention is always to give such big love. I am a very loving person. I want people to be so happy and to feel so cared for. That is who I am, and I know that's my value system, and I will go above and beyond for my people. So if I am cutting you out of my life, it is because there has been so much attempt to change things and no change has been able to
Leo
occur.
Loyalty does not want to do that.
I do not. I never do. Like, it takes so much. And I am a really deep thinker, and I do really crave people to want to hear my thoughts and opinions. And I think for a lot of that, there's just most of my no contact cutoffs with friendships have been way more centered around there being such little respect for me and my feelings.
Yeah, I just think a good way to end this is to remember that, like, everyone is human. Like, we're all beings having a human experience. Humans, we are meant to grow and expand and change and shift, but also we are very capable of just doubling down and staying where we're at and pretending to shift for the sake of that normalcy that you were talking about. And I think at the end of the day, like, we all deserve the autonomy to say, like, this connection is or isn't for me anymore. I think the best success story of this for me, like, no contact has been really hard, and I've had to go no contact with a lot of people in my past. But the best success story I have is my best friend. We met in second grade. We were attached to the hip all the way up till high school. And in high school, we both just had a lot of growth and healing that needed to be done. And we were butting heads. So we went no contact for almost a whole decade. And then, you know, we both were in therapy. I was the one that reached out and I said, hey, like, you've said some things in the past I've denied. Since being in therapy, I've realized XYZ. You know, and just that accountability aspect. She ended up doing the same and saying, yeah, I definitely could have handled it better though. And then ever since then, we're right back to being joined at the freaking hip.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, sometimes you do just need a pause and it can come back together beautifully. Sometimes that's not going to happen, and that's okay too. Either way, you deserve to be respected and be able to be your most full, authentic self in the spaces that you occupy.
Mm-hmm. I hope this was some good food for thought, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.